Chapter 10 of The Railway Children. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Railway Children by Edith Nesbit. Chapter 10. The Terrible Secret. When they first went to live at Three Chimneys, the children had talked a great deal about their father, and had asked a great many questions about him, and what he was doing, and where he was, and when he would come home. Mother always answered their questions as well as she could, but as the time went on, they grew to speak less of him. Bobby had felt almost from the first that, for some strange, miserable reason, these questions hurt Mother and made her sad, and little by little the others came to have this feeling too, though they could not have put it into words. One day, when Mother was working so hard that she could not leave off even for 10 minutes, Bobby carried up her tea to the big bare room that they called Mother's workshop. It had hardly any furniture, just a table and a chair and a rug, but always big pots of flowers on the window-sills and on the mantelpiece. The children saw to that. And from the 3 long uncurtained windows, the beautiful stretch of meadow and moorland, the far violet of the hills, and the unchanging changefulness of cloud and sky.
"Here's your tea, Mother love,"
said Bobby.
"Do drink it while it's hot."
Mother laid down her pen among the pages that were scattered all over the table, pages covered with her writing, which was almost as plain as print, and much prettier. She ran her hands into her hair, as if she were going to pull it out by handfuls.
"Poor dear head,"
said Bobby.
"Does it ache?"
"No, yes, not much,"
said Mother.
"Bobby, do you think Peter and Phil are forgetting Father?"
"No,"
said Bobby indignantly.
"Why?"
None of you ever speak of him now."
Bobby stood first on one leg and then on the other.
"We often talk about him when we're by ourselves,"
she said.
"But not to me,"
said Mother.
"Why?"
Bobby did not find it easy to say why.
You,
she said, and stopped. She went over to the window and looked out.
"Bobby, come here,"
said her mother, and Bobby came.
"Now,"
said Mother, putting her arm round Bobby and laying her ruffled head against Bobby's shoulder.
"try to tell me, dear."
Bobby fidgeted.
"Tell Mother."
"Well then,"
said Bobby,
"I thought you were so unhappy about Daddy not being here it made you worse when I talked about him, so I stopped doing it."
"And the others?"
"I don't know about the others,"
said Bobby.
"I never said anything about that to them, but I expect they felt the same about it as me."
"Bobby, dear,"
said Mother, still leaning her head against her.
"I'll tell you. Besides parting from Father, he and I have had a great sorrow. Oh, terrible. Worse than anything you could think of. And at first it did hurt to hear you all talking about him as if everything were just the same. But it would be much more terrible if you were to forget him. That would be worse than anything."
"The trouble,"
said Bobby in a very little voice.
"I promised I would never ask you any questions, and I never have I? But the trouble, it won't last always."
"No,"
said Mother.
"The worst will be over when Father comes home to us."
"I wish I could comfort you,"
said Bobby.
"Oh, my dear, do you suppose you don't? Do you think I haven't noticed how good you've all been? Not quarreling nearly as much as you used to, and all the little kind things you do for me? The flowers, and cleaning my shoes, and tearing up to make my bed before I get time to do it myself."
Bobby had sometimes wondered whether Mother noticed these things.
"That's nothing,"
she said.
"to what—"
"I must get on with my work,"
said Mother, giving Bobby one last squeeze.
"Don't say anything to the others."
That evening, in the hour before bedtime, instead of reading to the children, Mother told them of the games she and Father used to have when they were children and lived near each other in the country. Tales of the adventures of Father with Mother's brothers when they were all boys together. Very funny stories they were, and the children laughed as they listened.
"Uncle Edward died before he was grown up, didn't he?"
said Phyllis, as Mother lighted the bedroom candles.
Yes, dear,
said Mother.
You would have loved him. He was such a brave boy, and so adventurous, always in mischief, and yet friends with everybody in spite of it. And your Uncle Reggie's in Ceylon. Yes, and Father's away too, but I think they'd all like to think we enjoyed talking about the things they used to do. Don't you think so?
Not Uncle Edward,
said Phyllis in a shocked tone.
He's in heaven.
You don't suppose he's forgotten us and all the old times because God has taken him, any more than I forget him? Oh, no, he remembers. He's only away for a little time. We shall see him some day.
And Uncle Reggie? And Father too?
said Peter.
Yes,
said Mother.
Uncle Reggie and Father too. Good night, my darlings.
Good night,
said everyone. Bobby hugged her mother more closely even than usual and whispered in her ear,
Oh, I do love you so, Mummy. I do.
When Bobby came to think it all over, she tried not to wonder what the great trouble was, but she could not always help it. Father was not dead, like poor Uncle Edward. Mother had said so. And he was not ill, or Mother would have been with him. Being poor wasn't the trouble. Bobby knew it was something nearer the heart than money could be.
I mustn't try to think what it is.
She told herself.
No, I mustn't. I am glad Mother noticed about us not quarrelling so much. We'll keep that up.
And alas, that very afternoon she and Peter had what Peter called a first-class shindy. They had not been a week at Three Chimneys before they had asked Mother to let them have a piece of garden each for their very own, and she had agreed. And the south border under the peach trees had been divided into 3 pieces, and they were allowed to plant whatever they liked there. Phyllis had planted mignonette and nasturtium and Virginia stock in hers. The seeds came up, and though they looked just like weeds, Phyllis believed that they would bear flowers some day. The Virginia stock justified her faith quite soon, and her garden was gay with a band of bright little flowers, pink and white and red and mauve.
I can't weed for fear I'll pull up the wrong things,
she used to say comfortably.
It is such a lot of work.
Peter sowed vegetable seeds in his, carrots and onions and turnips. The seed was given to him by the farmer who lived in the nice, black and white, wood and plaster house just beyond the bridge. He kept turkeys and guinea fowls, and was a most amiable man. But Peter's vegetables never had much of a chance, because he liked to use the earth of his garden for digging canals and making forts and earthworks for his toy soldiers. And the seeds of vegetables rarely come to much in a soil that is constantly disturbed for the purposes of war and irrigation. Bobby planted rose bushes in her garden, but all the little new leaves of the rose bushes shriveled and withered, perhaps because she moved them from the other part of the garden in May, which is not at all the right time of year for moving roses. But she would not own that they were dead, and hoped on against hope until the day when Perks came up to see the garden and told her quite plainly that all her roses were as dead as doornails.
"Only good for bonfires, miss,"
he said.
"You just dig 'em up and burn 'em, and I'll give you some nice fresh roots out from my garden, pansies and stocks and sweet willies and forget-me-nots. I'll bring 'em along tomorrow, if you get the ground ready."
So next day she set to work, and that happened to be the day when Mother had praised her and the others about not quarrelling. She moved the rose bushes and carried them to the other end of the garden, where the rubbish heap was that they meant to make a bonfire of when Guy Fawkes' Day came. Meanwhile, Peter had decided to flatten out all his forts and earthworks, with a view to making a model of the railway tunnel, cutting, embankment, canal, aqueduct, bridges and all. So when Bobby came back from her last thorny journey with the dead rose bushes, he had got the rake and was using it busily.
I was using the rake.
Said Bobby.
Well, I'm using it now.
Said Peter.
But I had it first.
Said Bobby.
Then it's my turn now.
Said Peter, and that was how the quarrel began.
You're always being disagreeable about nothing,
said Peter after some heated argument.
I had the rake first,
said Bobby, flushed and defiant, holding on to its handle.
Don't! I tell you I said this morning I meant to have it. Didn't I, Phil?
Phyllis said she didn't want to be mixed up in their rows, and instantly, of course, she was.
If you remember, you ought to say.
Of course she doesn't remember, but she might say so. I wish I'd had a brother instead of 2 whiny little kitty sisters,
said Peter. This was always recognised as indicating the high water mark of Peter's rage. Bobby made the reply she always made to it.
I can't think why little boys were ever invented.
And just as she said it, she looked up and saw the 3 long windows of Mother's workshop flashing in the red rays of the sun. The sight brought back those words of praise.
You don't quarrel like you used to do.
Oh!
cried Bobby, just as if she had been hit, or had caught her finger in a door, or had felt the hideous sharp beginnings of toothache.
What's the matter?
said Phyllis. Bobby wanted to say,
Don't let's quarrel. Mother hates it so.
But though she tried hard, she couldn't. Peter was looking too disagreeable and insulting.
Take the horrid rake, then,
was the best she could manage, and she suddenly let go her hold on the handle. Peter had been holding on to it too firmly and pullingly, and now that the pull the other way was suddenly stopped, he staggered and fell over backward, the teeth of the rake between his feet.
Serve you right,
said Bobby before she could stop herself. Peter lay still for half a moment, long enough to frighten Bobby a little. Then he frightened her a little more, for he sat up, screamed once, turned rather pale, and then lay back and began to shriek, faintly but steadily. It sounded exactly like a pig being killed 1/4 mile off. Mother put her head out of the window, and it wasn't half a minute after that she was in the garden, kneeling by the side of Peter, who never for an instant ceased to squeal.
What happened, Bobby?
Mother asked.
It was a rake,
said Phyllis.
Peter was pulling at it. So was Bobby, and she let go, and he went over.
Stop that noise, Peter,
said Mother.
Come, stop at once.
Peter used up what breath he had left in a last squeal and stopped.
Now,
said Mother.
Are you hurt?
If he was really hurt, he wouldn't make such a fuss,
said Bobby, still trembling with fury.
He's not a coward.
I think my foot's broken off, that's all,
said Peter huffily, and sat up. Then he turned quite white. Mother put her arm round him.
He is hurt,
she said.
He's fainted. Here, Bobby, sit down and take his head on your lap.
Then Mother undid Peter's boots. As she took the right one off, something dripped from his foot onto the ground. It was red blood. And when the stocking came off, there were 3 red wounds in Peter's foot and ankle, where the teeth of the rake had bitten him, and his foot was covered with red smears.
Run for water, a basinful,
said Mother, and Phyllis ran. She upset most of the water out of the basin in her haste, and had to fetch more in a jug. Peter did not open his eyes again till Mother had tied her handkerchief round his foot, and she and Bobby had carried him in and laid him on the brown wooden settle in the dining-room. By this time Phyllis was halfway to the doctor's. Mother sat by Peter and bathed his foot and talked to him, and Bobby went out and got tea ready and put on the kettle.
It's all I can do,
she told herself.
Oh, suppose Peter should die, or be a helpless cripple for life, or have to walk with crutches, or wear a boot with a sole like a log of wood.
She stood by the back door, reflecting on these gloomy possibilities, her eyes fixed on the water-butt.
I wish I'd never been born,
she said, and she said it out loud.
Why, Lawker mercy, what's that for?
asked a voice, and Perks stood before her with a wooden trug basket full of green-leafed things and soft, loose earth.
Oh, it's you,
she said.
Peter's hurt his foot with a rake. 3 great gaping wounds like soldiers get, and it was partly my fault.
That it wasn't, I'll go bail,
said Perks.
Doctor seen him?
Phyllis has gone for the doctor.
He'll be all right. You see if he isn't,
said Perks.
Why, my father's second cousin had a hay fork run into him, right into his inside, and he was right as ever in a few weeks, all except his being a bit weak in the head afterwards, and they did say that it was along of his getting a touch of the sun in the hayfield, and not the fork at all. I remember him well, a kind-hearted chap, but soft, as you might say.
Bobby tried to let herself be cheered by this heartening reminiscence.
Well,
said Perks,
you won't want to be bothered with gardening just this minute, I dare say. You show me where your garden is, and I'll pop the bits of stuff in for you. And I'll hang about, if I may make so free, to see the doctor as he comes out, and hear what he says. You cheer up, missy. I lay a pound he ain't hurt, not to speak of.
But he was. The doctor came and looked at the foot, and bandaged it beautifully, and said that Peter must not put it to the ground for at least a week.
He won't be lame, or have to wear crutches or a lump on his foot, will he?
Whispered Bobby breathlessly at the door.
My aunt, no,
said Dr. Forrest.
He'll be as nimble as ever on his pins in a fortnight. Don't you worry, little Mother Goose.
It was when Mother had gone to the gate with the doctor to take his last instructions, and Phyllis was filling the kettle for tea, that Peter and Bobby found themselves alone.
He says you won't be lame or anything,
said Bobby.
Of course I shan't, silly,
said Peter, very much relieved all the same.
Oh, Peter, I am so sorry,
said Bobby after a pause.
That's all right,
said Peter gruffly.
It was all my fault,
said Bobby.
Rot,
said Peter.
If we hadn't quarrelled, it wouldn't have happened. I knew it was wrong to quarrel. I wanted to say so, but somehow I couldn't.
Don't drivel,
said Peter.
I shouldn't have stopped if you had said it. Not likely. And besides, us rowing hadn't anything to do with it. I might have caught my foot in the hoe, or taken off my fingers in the chaff-cutting machine, or blown my nose off with fireworks. It would have been hurt just the same, whether we'd been rowing or not.
But I knew it was wrong to quarrel,
said Bobby in tears.
And now you're hurt, and...
Now look here,
said Peter firmly.
You just dry up. If you're not careful, you'll turn into a beastly little Sunday school prig, so I tell you.
I don't mean to be a prig, but it's so hard not to be when you're really trying to be good.
The gentle reader may perhaps have suffered from this difficulty.
Not it,
said Peter.
It's a jolly good thing it wasn't you was hurt. I'm glad it was me. There, if it had been you, you'd have been lying on the sofa, looking like a suffering angel, and being the light of the anxious household and all that, and I couldn't have stood it.
No, I shouldn't,
said Bobby.
Yes, you would,
said Peter.
I tell you I shouldn't.
I tell you, you would.
Oh, children,
said Mother's voice at the door.
Quarrelling again? Already?
We aren't quarrelling, not really,
said Peter.
I wish you wouldn't think it's rows every time we don't agree.
When Mother had gone out again, Bobby broke out,
Peter, I am sorry you're hurt, but you are a beast to say I'm a prig.
Well,
said Peter unexpectedly.
Perhaps I am. You did say I wasn't a coward, even when you were in such a wax. The only thing is, don't you be a prig, that's all. You keep your eyes open, and if you feel priggishness coming on, just stop in time, see?
Yes,
said Bobby.
I see.
Then let's call it Pax,
said Peter magnanimously.
Bury the hatchet in the fathoms of the past. Shake hands on it. I say, Bobby, old chap, I am tired.
He was tired for many days after that, and the settle seemed hard and uncomfortable, in spite of all the pillows and bolsters and soft-folded rugs. It was terrible not to be able to go out. They moved the settle to the window, and from there Peter could see the smoke of the trains winding along the valley, but he could not see the trains. At first Bobby found it quite hard to be as nice to him as she wanted to be, for fear he should think her priggish. But that soon wore off, and both she and Phyllis were, as he observed, jolly good sorts. Mother sat with him when his sisters were out, and the words, "He's not a coward," made Peter determined not to make any fuss about the pain in his foot, though it was rather bad, especially at night. Praise helps people very much sometimes. There were visitors, too. Mrs. Perks came up to ask how he was, and so did the station master, and several of the village people. But the time went slowly, slowly.
I do wish there was something to read,
said Peter.
I've read all our books 50 times over.
I'll go to the doctor's,
said Phyllis.
He is sure to have some.
Only about how to be ill, and about people's nasty insides, I expect,
said Peter.
Perks has a whole heap of magazines that came out of trains when people are tired of them,
said Bobby.
I'll run down and ask him.
So the girls went their two ways. Bobby found Perks busy cleaning lamps.
And how's the young gent?
said he.
Better, thanks,
said Bobby.
but he's most frightfully bored. I came to ask you if you'd got any magazines you could lend him.
There now,
said Perks regretfully, rubbing his ear with a black and oily lump of cotton waste.
Why didn't I think of that now? I was trying to think of something as at a museum only this morning, and I couldn't think of anything better than a guinea pig. And a young chap I know's going to fetch that over for him this tea time.
How lovely! A real live guinea. He will be pleased, but he'd like the magazines as well.
That's just it,
said Perks.
I've just sent the pic of him to Snigson's boy, him what's just getting over the pneumonia. But I've lots of illustrated papers left.
He turned to the pile of papers in the corner and took up a heap 6 inches thick.
There,
he said.
I'll just slip a bit of string and a bit of paper round 'em.
He pulled an old newspaper from the pile and spread it on the table and made a neat parcel of it.
There,
said he.
There's lots of pictures, and if he likes to mess 'em about with his paintbox or coloured chalks or whatnot, why, let him. I don't want them.
You're a dear,
said Bobby, took the parcel and started. The papers were heavy, and when she had to wait at the level crossing while a train went by, she rested the parcel on the top of the gate, and idly she looked at the printing on the paper that the parcel was wrapped in. Suddenly she clutched the parcel tighter and bent her head over it. It seemed like some horrible dream. She read on. The bottom of the column was torn off. She could read no farther. She never remembered how she got home, but she went on tiptoe to her room and locked the door. Then she undid the parcel and read that printed column again, sitting on the edge of her bed, her hands and feet icy cold, and her face burning. When she had read all there was, she drew a long, uneven breath.
So now I know,
she said. What she had read was headed, End of the Trial, Verdict, Sentence. The name of the man who had been tried was the name of her father. The verdict was guilty, and the sentence was 5 years penal servitude.
Oh, Daddy,
she whispered, crushing the paper hard.
It's not true. I don't believe it. You never did it. Never, never, never.
There was a hammering on the door.
What is it?
said Bobby.
It's me,
said the voice of Phyllis.
Tea's ready, and the boys brought Peter a guinea pig. Come along down.
And Bobby had to. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of The Railway Children. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Railway Children by Edith Nesbit. Chapter 11. The Hound in the Red Jacket. Bobby knew the secret now. A sheet of old newspaper wrapped round a parcel, just a little chance like that, had given the secret to her, and she had to go down to tea and pretend that there was nothing the matter. The pretence was bravely made, but it wasn't very successful, for when she came in, everyone looked up from tea and saw her pink-lidded eyes and her pale face with red tear blotches on it.
My darling,
cried Mother, jumping up from the tea tray.
Whatever is the matter?
My head aches, rather,
said Bobby, and indeed it did.
Has anything gone wrong?
Mother asked.
I'm all right, really,
said Bobby, and she telegraphed to her mother from her swollen eyes this brief imploring message.
Not before the others.
Tea was not a cheerful meal. Peter was so distressed by the obvious fact that something horrid had happened to Bobby that he limited his speech to repeating,
More bread and butter, please.
at startlingly short intervals. Phyllis stroked her sister's hand under the table to express sympathy. and knocked her cup over as she did it. Fetching a cloth and wiping up the spilt milk helped Bobby a little, but she thought that tea would never end. Yet at last it did end, as all things do at last, and when Mother took out the tray, Bobby followed her.
She's gone to own up,
said Phyllis to Peter.
I wonder what she's done.
Broken something, I suppose.
Said Peter.
But she needn't be so silly over it. Mother never rows for accidents. Listen. Yes, they're going upstairs. She's taking Mother up to show her. The water jug with stalks on it, I expect it is.
Bobby, in the kitchen, had caught hold of Mother's hand as she set down the tea things.
What is it?
Mother asked. But Bobby only said,
Come upstairs. Come up where nobody can hear us.
When she had got Mother alone in her room, she locked the door and then stood quite still and quite without words. All through tea she had been thinking of what to say. She had decided that,
I know all.
Or,
All is known to me.
Or,
The terrible secret is a secret no longer.
Would be the proper thing. But now that she and her mother and that awful sheet of newspaper were alone in the room together, she found that she could say nothing. Suddenly she went to Mother and put her arms round her and began to cry again. And still she could find no words, only,
Oh, Mammy! Oh, Mammy! Oh, Mammy!
over and over again. Mother held her very close and waited. Suddenly Bobby broke away from her and went to her bed. From under her mattress she pulled out the paper she had hidden there and held it out, pointing to her father's name with a finger that shook.
Oh, Bobby!
Mother cried, when one little quick look had shown her what it was.
You don't believe it? You don't believe Daddy did it?
No!
Bobby almost shouted. She had stopped crying.
That's all right,
said Mother.
It's not true, and they've shut him up in prison, but he's done nothing wrong. He's good and noble and honorable, and he belongs to us. We have to think of that and be proud of him, and wait.
Again Bobby clung to her mother, and again only one word came to her. But now that word was,
Daddy!
And,
Oh, Daddy! Oh, Daddy! Oh, Daddy!
again and again.
Why didn't you tell me, Mammy?
She asked presently.
Are you going to tell the others?
Mother asked.
No.
Why?
Because...
Exactly,
said Mother.
So you understand why I didn't tell you. We two must help each other to be brave.
Yes.
said Bobby.
Mother, will it make you more unhappy if you tell me all about it? I want to understand.
So then, sitting cuddled up close to her mother, Bobby heard all about it. She heard how those men who had asked to see Father on that remembered last night, when the engine was being mended, had come to arrest him, charging him with selling state secrets to the Russians, with being, in fact, a spy and a traitor. She heard about the trial and about the evidence. Letters found in Father's desk at the office, letters that convinced the jury that Father was guilty.
Oh, how could they look at him and believe it?
Cried Bobby.
And how could anyone do such a thing?
Someone did it.
Said Mother.
And all the evidence was against Father. Those letters.
Yes, how did the letters get into his desk?
Someone put them there. And the person who put them there was the person who was really guilty.
He must be feeling pretty awful all this time,
said Bobby thoughtfully.
I don't believe he had any feelings,
Mother said hotly.
He couldn't have done a thing like that if he had.
Perhaps he just shoved the letters into the desk to hide them when he thought he was going to be found out. Why don't you tell the lawyers or someone that it must have been that person? There wasn't anyone that would have hurt Father on purpose, was there?
I don't know. The man under him who got Daddy's place when the awful thing happened, he was always jealous of your father because Daddy was so clever and everyone thought such a lot of him. And Daddy never quite trusted that man.
Couldn't we explain all that to someone?
Nobody will listen,
said Mother very bitterly.
Nobody at all. Do you suppose I've not tried everything? No, my dearest, there's nothing to be done. All we can do, you, I, and Daddy, is to be brave and patient and—
She spoke very softly.
to pray, Bobby dear.
Mother, you've got very thin.
Said Bobby abruptly.
A little, perhaps.
And oh,
Said Bobby.
I do think you're the bravest person in the world as well as the nicest.
We won't talk about this any more, will we, dear?
Said Mother.
We must bear it and be brave and— Darling, try not to think of it. Try to be cheerful and amuse yourself and the others. It's much easier for me if you can be a little bit happy and enjoy things. Wash your poor little round face and let's go out into the garden for a bit.
The other two were very gentle and kind to Bobby, and they did not ask her what was the matter. This was Peter's idea, and he had drilled Phyllis, who would have asked 100 questions if she had been left to herself. A week later, Bobby managed to get away alone, and once more she wrote a letter, and once more it was to the old gentleman.
My dear friend,
She said,
you see what is in this paper. It is not true. Father never did it. Mother says someone put the papers in Father's desk, and she says the man under him that got Father's place afterwards was jealous of Father, and Father suspected him a long time. But nobody listens to a word she says. But you are so good and clever, and you found out about the Russian gentleman's wife directly. Can't you find out who did the treason? Because he wasn't Father, upon my honour. He is an Englishman, and incapable to do such things. And then they would let Father out of prison. It is dreadful, and Mother is getting so thin. She told us once to pray for all prisoners and captives. I see now. Oh, do help me. There's only just Mother and me know, and we can't do anything. Peter and Phil don't know. I'll pray for you twice every day as long as I live, if you'll only try. Just try to find out. Think if it was your Daddy, what you would feel. Oh, do help me. With love, I remain your affectionately little friend, Roberta. P.S. Mother would send her kind regards if she knew I am writing, but it is no use telling her I am, in case you can't do anything. But I know you will. Bobby, with best love.
She cut the account of her father's trial out of the newspaper with Mother's big cutting-out scissors, and put it in the envelope with her letter. Then she took it down to the station, going out the back way and round by the road, so that the others should not see her, and offered to come with her, and she gave the letter to the station-master to give to the old gentleman next morning.
Where have you been?
Shouted Peter from the top of the yard wall where he and Phyllis were.
To the station, of course.
Said Bobby.
Give us a hand, Pete.
She set her foot on the lock of the yard door. Peter reached down a hand.
What on earth?
She asked, as she reached the wall top. For Phyllis and Peter were very muddy. A lump of wet clay lay between them on the wall. They had each a slip of slate in a very dirty hand, and behind Peter, out of the reach of accidents, were several strange rounded objects, rather like very fat sausages, hollow but closed up at one end.
It's nests,
said Peter.
Swallows' nests. We're going to dry them in the oven and hang them up with string under the eaves of the coach house.
Yes.
Said Phyllis.
And then we're going to save up all the wool and hair we can get. And in the spring we'll line them, and then how pleased the swallows will be.
I've often thought people don't do nearly enough for dumb animals,
said Peter with an air of virtue.
I do think people might have thought of making nests for the poor little swallows before this.
Oh,
said Bobby vaguely.
If everybody thought of everything, there'd be nothing left for anybody else to think about.
Look at the nests. Aren't they pretty?
Said Phyllis, reaching across Peter to grasp a nest.
Look out, Phil, you goat,
said her brother. But it was too late. Her strong little fingers had crushed the nest.
There now,
said Peter.
Never mind,
said Bobby.
It is one of my own,
said Phyllis.
So you needn't jaw, Peter. Yes, we've put our initial names on the ones we've done, so that the swallows will know who they've got to be so grateful to and fond of.
Swallows can't read, silly,
said Peter.
Silly yourself,
retorted Phyllis.
How do you know?
Who thought of making the nests anyhow?
Shouted Peter.
I did,
screamed Phyllis.
Yeah,
rejoined Peter.
You only thought of making hay ones and sticking them in the ivy for the sparrows, and that had been sopping long before egg-laying time. It was me, said Clay and Swallows.
I don't care what you said.
Look,
said Bobby.
I've made the nest all right again. Give me the bit of stick to mark your initial name on it. But how can you? Your letter and Peter's are the same. P for Peter, P for Phyllis.
I put F for Phyllis,
said the child of that name.
That's how it sounds. The swallows wouldn't spell Phyllis with a P, I'm sure.
They can't spell at all.
Peter was still insisting.
Then why do you see them always on Christmas cards and Valentines with letters around their necks? How would they know where to go if they couldn't read?
That's only in pictures. You never saw one really with letters round its neck.
Well, I have a pigeon then. At least Daddy told me they did. Only was under their wings and not round their necks. But it comes to the same thing and...
I say,
interrupted Bobby.
There's to be a paper chase tomorrow.
Who?
Peter asked.
Grammar school. Perks thinks the hare will go along by the line at first. We might go along the cutting. You can see a long way from there.
The paper chase was found to be a more amusing subject of conversation than the reading powers of swallows. Bobby had hoped it might be. And next morning, Mother let them take their lunch and go out for the day to see the paper chase.
If we go to the cutting,
said Peter,
we shall see the workmen, even if we miss the paper chase.
Of course it had taken some time to get the line clear from the rocks and earth and trees that had fallen on it when the great landslip happened. That was the occasion, you will remember, when the 3 children saved the train from being wrecked by waving 6 little red flannel petticoat flags. It is always interesting to watch people working, especially when they work with such interesting things as spades and picks and shovels and planks and barrows, when they have cindery red fires in iron pots with round holes in them, and red lamps hanging near the works at night. Of course the children were never out at night, but once, at dusk, when Peter had got out of his bedroom skylight onto the roof, he had seen the red lamp shining far away at the edge of the cutting. The children had often been down to watch the work, and this day the interest of picks and spades and barrows being wheeled along planks completely put the paper chase out of their heads, so that they quite jumped when a voice just behind them panted,
"Let me pass, please."
It was the hare, a big-boned, loose-limbed boy with dark hair lying flat on a very damp forehead. The bag of torn paper under his arm was fastened across one shoulder by a strap. The children stood back. The hare ran along the line, and the workmen leaned on their picks to watch him. He ran on steadily, and disappeared into the mouth of the tunnel.
"That's against the bylaws,"
said the foreman.
"Why worry?"
said the oldest workman.
"Live and let live's what I always say. You ain't never been young yourself, Mr. Bates?"
"I ought to report him,"
said the foreman.
"Why, spoil sport's what I always say."
"Passengers are forbidden to cross the line on any pretense,"
murmured the foreman doubtfully.
"He ain't no passenger,"
said one of the workmen.
"Nor he ain't crossed the line, not where we could see him do it,"
said another.
"Nor yet he ain't made no pretenses,"
said a third.
"And,"
said the oldest workman,
"he's outer sight now. What the eye don't see, the art needn't take no notice of's what I always say."
And now, following the track of the hare by the little white blots of scattered paper, came the hounds. There were 30 of them, and they all came down the steep ladder-like steps by 1s and 2s and 3s and 6s and 7s. Bobby and Phyllis and Peter counted them as they passed. The foremost ones hesitated a moment at the foot of the ladder, then their eyes caught the gleam of scattered whiteness along the line, and they turned towards the tunnel, and by 1s and 2s and 3s and 6s and 7s disappeared into the dark mouth of it. The last one, in a red jersey, seemed to be extinguished by the darkness, like a candle that is blown out.
They don't know what they're in for,
said the foreman.
It isn't so easy running in the dark. The tunnel takes 2 or 3 turns.
They'll take a long time to get through, you think?
Peter asked.
An hour or more, I shouldn't wonder.
Then let's cut across the top and see them come out at the other end,
said Peter.
We shall get there long before they do.
The counsel seemed good, and they went. They climbed the steep steps from which they had picked the wild cherry blossom for the grave of the little wild rabbit, and, reaching the top of the cutting, set their faces towards the hill through which the tunnel was cut. It was stiff work.
It's like Alps,
said Bobby breathlessly.
Or Andes,
said Peter.
It's like what's its names?
Gasped Phyllis.
Mount Everlasting. Do let's stop.
Stick to it,
panted Peter.
You'll get your second wind in a minute.
Phyllis consented to stick to it, and on they went, running when the turf was smooth and the slope easy, climbing over stones, helping themselves up rocks by the branches of trees, creeping through narrow openings between tree trunks and rocks, and so on and on, up and up, till at last they stood on the very top of the hill where they had so often wished to be.
Halt!
cried Peter, and threw himself flat on the grass. For the very top of the hill was a smooth, turfed tableland, dotted with mossy rocks and little mountain ash trees. The girls also threw themselves down flat.
Plenty of time,
Peter panted.
The rest's all downhill.
When they were rested enough to sit up and look round them, Bobby cried,
Oh, look,
What at?
said Phyllis.
the view,
said Bobby.
I hate views.
Said Phyllis.
Don't you, Peter?
Let's get on,
said Peter.
But this isn't like a view they take you to in carriages when you're at the seaside, all sea and sand and bare hills. It's like the coloured counties in one of Mother's poetry books.
It's not so dusty,
said Peter.
Look at the aqueduct straddling slap across the valley like a giant centipede, and then the town sticking their church spires up out of the trees like pens out of an inkstand. I think it's more like, there could he see the banners of 12 fair cities shine.
I love it,
said Bobby.
It's worth the climb.
The paper chase is worth the climb.
Said Phyllis.
If you don't lose it. Let's get on. It's all downhill now.
I said that 10 minutes ago,
said Peter.
Well, I've said it now.
Said Phyllis.
Come on.
Loads of time,
said Peter, and there was. For when they had got down to a level with the top of the tunnel's mouth, they were a couple of 100 yards out of their reckoning, and had to creep along the face of the hill. There was no sign of the hare or the hounds.
They've gone long ago, of course,
said Phyllis, as they leaned on the brick parapet above the tunnel.
I don't think so,
said Bobby.
But even if they had, it's ripping here, and we shall see the trains come out of the tunnel like dragons out of lairs. We've never seen that from the top side before.
No more we have,
said Phyllis, partially appeased. It was really a most exciting place to be in. The top of the tunnel seemed ever so much farther from the line than they had expected, and it was like being on a bridge, but a bridge overgrown with bushes and creepers and grass and wild flowers.
I know the paper chase has gone long ago,
said Phyllis every 2 minutes, and she hardly knew whether she was pleased or disappointed when Peter, leaning over the parapet, suddenly cried,
Look out! Here he comes!
They all leaned over the sun-warmed brick wall in time to see the hare, going very slowly, come out from the shadow of the tunnel.
There now,
said Peter.
What did I tell you? Now for the hounds.
Very soon came the hounds, by 1s and 2s and 3s and 6s and 7s, and they also were going slowly and seemed very tired. 2 or 3 who lagged far behind came out long after the others.
There,
said Bobby.
That's all. Now what shall we do?
Go along into the tulgey wood over there and have lunch,
said Phyllis.
We can see them for miles from up here.
Not yet,
said Peter.
That's not the last. There's the one in the red jersey to come yet. Let's say the last of them come out.
But though they waited and waited and waited, the boy in the red jersey did not appear.
Let's have lunch,
said Phyllis.
I got a pain in my front with being so hungry. You must have missed seeing the red jersey one when he came out with the others.
But Bobby and Peter agreed that he had not come out with the others.
Let's get down to the tunnel mouth,
said Peter.
Then perhaps we shall see him coming along from the inside. I expect he felt Spunchuck and rested in one of the manholes. You stay up here and watch, Bob, and when I signal from below, you come down. We might miss seeing him on the way down with all these trees.
So the others climbed down, and Bobby waited till they signalled to her from the line below. And then she too scrambled down the roundabout slippery path among roots and moss till she stepped out between two dogwood trees and joined the others on the line. And still there was no sign of the hound with the red jersey.
Oh, do let's have something to eat,
wailed Phyllis.
I shall die if you don't, and then you'll be sorry.
Give her the sandwiches for goodness sake and stop her silly mouth,
said Peter, not quite unkindly.
Look here,
he added, turning to Bobby.
Perhaps we'd better have one each too. We may need all our strength. No more than one, though. There's no time.
What?
asked Bobby, her mouth already full, for she was just as hungry as Phyllis.
Don't you see?
replied Peter impressively.
The red-jerseyed hound has had an accident. That's what it is. Perhaps even as we speak, he's lying with his head on the metals, an unresisting prey to any passing express.
Oh, don't try to talk like a book,
cried Bobby, bolting what was left of her sandwich.
Come on. Phil, keep close behind me, and if a train comes, stand flat against the tunnel wall and hold your petticoats close to you.
Give me one more sandwich,
pleaded Phyllis.
And I will.
I'm going first,
said Peter.
It was my idea.
And he went. Of course you know what going into a tunnel is like. The engine gives a scream, and then suddenly the noise of the running, rattling train changes, and grows different and much louder. Grown-up people pull up the windows and hold them by the strap. The railway carriage suddenly grows like night. With lamps, of course, unless you're in a slow local train, in which case lamps are not always provided. Then, by and by, the darkness outside the carriage window is touched by puffs of cloudy whiteness. Then you see a blue light on the walls of the tunnel. Then the sound of the moving train changes once more, and you are out in the good open air again, and grown-ups let the straps go. The windows, all dim with the yellow breath of the tunnel, rattle down into their places, and you see once more the dip and catch of the telegraph wires beside the line, and the straight-cut hawthorn hedges with the tiny baby trees growing up out of them every 30 yards. All this, of course, is what a tunnel means when you are in a train. But everything is quite different when you walk into a tunnel on your own feet and tread on shifting, sliding stones and gravel, on a path that curves downwards from the shining metals to the wall. Then you see slimy, oozy trickles of water running down the inside of the tunnel, and you notice that the bricks are not red or brown as they are at the tunnel's mouth, but dull, sticky, sickly green. Your voice when you speak is quite changed from what it was out in the sunshine, and it is a long time before the tunnel is quite dark. It was not yet quite dark in the tunnel when Phyllis caught at Bobby's skirt, ripping out 1/2 yard of gathers, but no one noticed this at the time.
I want to go back,
she said.
I don't like it. It'll be pitch dark in a minute. I won't go on in the dark. I don't care what you say, I won't.
Don't be a silly cuckoo,
said Peter.
I've got a candle end and matches and... What's that?
That was a low humming sound on the railway line, a trembling of the wires beside it, a buzzing humming sound that grew louder and louder as they listened.
It's a train,
said Bobby.
Which line?
Let me go back,
cried Phyllis, struggling to get away from the hand by which Bobby held her.
Don't be a coward,
said Bobby.
It's quite safe. Stand back.
Come on,
shouted Peter, who was a few yards ahead.
Quick, manhole!
The roar of the advancing train was now louder than the noise you hear when your head is under water in the bath and both taps are running, and you're kicking with your heels against the bath's tin sides. But Peter had shouted for all he was worth, and Bobby heard him. She dragged Phyllis along to the manhole. Phyllis, of course, stumbled over the wires and grazed both her legs, But they dragged her in, and all three stood in the dark, damp, arched recess, while the train roared louder and louder. It seemed as if it would deafen them, and in the distance they could see its eyes of fire growing bigger and brighter every instant.
It is a dragon! I always knew it was. It takes its own shape in here, in the dark,
shouted Phyllis, but nobody heard her. You see, the train was shouting too, and its voice was bigger than hers. And now, with a rush and a roar and a rattle, and a long dazzling flash of lighted carriage windows, a smell of smoke and blast of hot air, the train hurtled by, clanging and jangling and echoing in the vaulted roof of the tunnel. Phyllis and Bobby clung to each other. Even Peter caught hold of Bobby's arm,
in case you should be frightened,
as he explained afterwards. And now, slowly and gradually, the tail lights grew smaller and smaller, and so did the noise, till, with one last whizz, the train got itself out of the tunnel, and silence settled again on its damp walls and dripping roof.
"Oh!"
said the children, all together in a whisper. Peter was lighting the candle end with a hand that trembled.
"Come on,"
he said, but he had to clear his throat before he could speak in his natural voice.
"Oh!"
said Phyllis.
"If the red-jerseyed one was in the way of the train?"
"We've got to go and see,"
said Peter.
"Couldn't we go and send someone from the station?"
said Phyllis.
Would you rather wait here for us?
asked Bobby severely, and, of course, that settled the question. So the three went on into the deeper darkness of the tunnel. Peter led, holding his candle end high to light the way. The grease ran down his fingers, and some of it right up his sleeve. He found a long streak from wrist to elbow when he went to bed that night. It was not more than 150 yards from the spot where they had stood while the train went by that Peter stood still, shouted,
"Hello!"
and then went on much quicker than before. When the others caught him up, he stopped, and he stopped within a yard of what they had come into the tunnel to look for. Phyllis saw a gleam of red and shut her eyes tight. There, by the curved, pebbly down line, was the red-jerseyed hound. His back was against the wall, his arms hung limply by his sides, and his eyes were shut.
"Was there red blood? Is he all killed?"
asked Phyllis, screwing her eyelids more tightly together.
"Killed? Nonsense,"
said Peter.
"There's nothing red about him except his jersey. He's only fainted. What on earth are we to do?"
Can we move him?
asked Bobby.
"I don't know. He's a big chap."
Suppose we bathe his forehead with water. No, I know we haven't any, but milk's just as wet. There's a whole bottle.
"Yes,"
said Peter.
"and they rub people's hands, I believe."
"They burn feathers, I know,"
said Phyllis.
"What's the good of saying that when we haven't any feathers?"
"As it happens,"
said Phyllis in a tone of exasperated triumph.
"I've got a shuttlecock in my pocket, so there."
And now Peter rubbed the hands of the red-jerseyed one. Bobby burned the feathers of the shuttlecock, one by one, under his nose. Phyllis splashed warmish milk on his forehead, and all three kept on saying as fast and as earnestly as they could,
"Oh, look up."
"Speak to me."
"For my sake, speak."
End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12 of The Railway Children. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Railway Children by Edith Nesbit. Chapter 12. What Bobby Brought Home.
Oh, look up.
"Speak to me."
"For my sake, speak."
The children said the words over and over again to the unconscious hound in a red jersey, who sat with closed eyes and pale face against the side of the tunnel.
Wet his ears with milk,
said Bobby.
I know they do it to people that faint, with eau de cologne, but I expect milk's just as good.
So they wetted his ears, and some of the milk ran down his neck under the red jersey. It was very dark in the tunnel. The candle end Peter had carried, and which now burned on a flat stone, gave hardly any light at all.
"Oh, do look up,"
said Phyllis.
"For my sake. I believe he's dead."
For my sake,
repeated Bobby.
No, he isn't.
For any sake,
said Peter.
Come out of it.
And he shook the sufferer by the arm. And then the boy in the red jersey sighed and opened his eyes, and shut them again, and said in a very small voice,
"Chuck it."
Oh, he's not dead,
said Phyllis,
I knew he wasn't.
and she began to cry.
"What's up? I'm all right."
Said the boy.
Drink this,
Said Peter firmly, thrusting the nose of the milk bottle into the boy's mouth. The boy struggled, and some of the milk was upset before he could get his mouth free to say,
"What is it?"
It's milk.
Said Peter.
Fear not, you are in the hands of friends. Phil, you stop bleating this minute.
Do drink it.
Said Bobby gently.
It'll do you good.
So he drank, and the three stood by without speaking to him.
Let him be a minute.
Peter whispered.
He'll be all right as soon as the milk begins to run like fire through his veins.
He was,
"I'm better now.
he announced.
I remember all about it."
He tried to move, but the movement ended in a groan.
"Bother, I believe I've broken my leg."
He said.
Did you tumble down?
Asked Phyllis, sniffing.
"Of course not. I'm not a kiddie."
Said the boy indignantly.
"It was one of those beastly wires tripped me up, and when I tried to get up again, I couldn't stand, so I sat down. Gee willikins, it does hurt, though. How did you get here?"
We saw you all go into the tunnel, and then we went across the hill to see you all come out. And the others did, all but you, and you didn't. So we are a rescue party,
Said Peter with pride.
"You've got some pluck, I will say."
Remarked the boy.
Oh, that's nothing.
Said Peter with modesty.
Do you think you could walk if we helped you?
"I could try."
Said the boy. He did try, but he could only stand on one foot. The other dragged in a very nasty way.
"Yeah, let me sit down. I feel like dying."
Said the boy.
"Let go of me. Let go, quick."
He lay down and closed his eyes. The others looked at each other by the dim light of the little candle.
What on earth?
Said Peter.
Look here.
Said Bobby quickly.
You must go and get help. Go to the nearest house.
Yes, that's the only thing.
Said Peter.
Come on.
If you take his feet and Phil and I take his head, we could carry him to the manhole.
They did it. It was perhaps as well for the sufferer that he had fainted again.
Now,
Said Bobby.
I'll stay with him. You take the longest bit of candle, and oh, be quick, for this bit won't burn long.
I don't think Mother would like me leaving you,
Said Peter doubtfully.
Let me stay, and you and Phil go.
No, no,
Said Bobby.
You and Phil go, and lend me your knife. I'll try to get his boot off before he wakes up again.
I hope it's all right what we're doing.
Said Peter.
Of course it's all right.
Said Bobby impatiently.
What else would you do? Leave him here all alone because it's dark? Nonsense. Hurry up, that's all.
So they hurried up. Bobby watched their dark figures and the little light of the candle with an odd feeling of having come to the end of everything. She knew now, she thought, what nuns who were bricked up alive in convent walls felt like. Suddenly she gave herself a little shake.
Don't be a silly little girl,
she said. She was always very angry when anyone else called her a little girl, even if the adjective that went first was not silly, but nice or good or clever. And it was only when she was very angry with herself that she allowed Roberta to use that expression to Bobby. She fixed the little candle end on a broken brick near the red-jerseyed boy's feet. Then she opened Peter's knife. It was always hard to manage. A halfpenny was generally needed to get it open at all. This time Bobby somehow got it open with her thumbnail. She broke the nail, and it hurt horribly. Then she cut the boy's bootlace and got the boot off. She tried to pull off his stocking, but his leg was dreadfully swollen, and it did not seem to be the proper shape. So she cut the stocking down very slowly and carefully. It was a brown, knitted stocking, and she wondered who had knitted it, and whether it was the boy's mother, and whether she was feeling anxious about him, and how she would feel when he was brought home with his leg broken. When Bobby had got the stocking off and saw the poor leg, she felt as though the tunnel was growing darker, and the ground felt unsteady, and nothing seemed quite real.
Silly little girl,
said Roberta to Bobby, and felt better.
The poor leg.
She told herself.
It ought to have a cushion. Ah!
She remembered the day when she and Phyllis had torn up their red flannel petticoats to make danger signals to stop the train and prevent an accident. Her flannel petticoat today was white, but it would be quite as soft as a red one. She took it off.
"Oh, what useful things flannel petticoats are,"
she said.
"The man who invented them ought to have a statue directed to him."
And she said it aloud, because it seemed that any voice, even her own, would be a comfort in that darkness.
"What ought to be directed? Who to?"
asked the boy, suddenly and very feebly.
"Oh,"
said Bobby.
"Now you're better. Hold your teeth and don't let it hurt too much. Now."
She had folded the petticoat, and lifting his leg, laid it on the cushion of folded flannel.
"Don't faint again. Please don't,"
said Bobby as he groaned. She hastily wetted her handkerchief with milk and spread it over the poor leg.
"Oh, that hurts,"
cried the boy, shrinking.
"No, it doesn't. It's nice, really."
"What's your name?"
said Bobby.
"Jim."
"Mine's Bobby."
"But you're a girl, aren't you?"
"Yes, my long name's Roberta."
"I say, Bobby."
"Yes?"
"Wasn't there some more of you just now?"
"Yes, Peter and Phil. That's my brother and sister. They've gone to get someone to carry you out."
"What rum names. All boys."
"Yes, I wish I was a boy, don't you?"
"I think you're all right as you are."
"I didn't mean that. I mean, don't you wish you were a boy? But of course you are without wishing."
"You're just as brave as a boy. Why didn't you go with the others?"
"Somebody had to stay with you,"
said Bobby.
"Tell you what, Bobby,"
said Jim.
"you're a brick. Shake."
He reached out a red-jerseyed arm, and Bobby squeezed his hand.
"I won't shake it,"
she explained.
"because it would shake you, and that would shake your poor leg, and that would hurt. Have you got a hanky?"
"I don't expect I have."
He felt in his pocket.
"Yes, I have. What for?"
She took it and wetted it with milk and put it on his forehead.
"Oh, that's jolly,"
he said.
"What is it?"
"Milk,"
said Bobby.
"We haven't any water."
"You're a jolly good little nurse,"
said Jim.
"I do it for Mother sometimes,"
said Bobby.
"Not milk, of course, but scent or vinegar and water. I say, I must put the candle out now, because there mayn't be enough of the other one to get you out by."
"By George,"
said he.
"you think of everything."
Bobby blew. Out went the candle. You have no idea how black velvety the darkness was.
"I say, Bobby,"
said a voice through the blackness.
"aren't you afraid of the dark?"
Not very, that is."
"Let's hold hands,"
said the boy, and it was really rather good of him, because he was like most boys of his age, and hated all material tokens of affection, such as kissing and holding of hands. He called all such things pawings, and detested them. The darkness was more bearable to Bobby now that her hand was held in the large rough hand of the red-jerseyed sufferer, and he, holding her little smooth hot paw, was surprised to find that he did not mind it so much as he expected. She tried to talk to amuse him, and take his mind off his sufferings, but it is very difficult to go on talking in the dark, and presently they found themselves in a silence, only broken now and then by a
"You all right, Bobby?"
or an
"I'm afraid it's hurting you most awfully, Jim. I am so sorry."
And it was very cold. Peter and Phyllis tramped down the long way of the tunnel towards daylight, the candle grease dripping over Peter's fingers. There were no accidents, unless you count Phyllis's catching her frock on a wire and tearing a long, jagged slit in it, and tripping over her bootlace when it came undone, or going down on her hands and knees, all four of which were grazed.
"There is no end to this tunnel,"
said Phyllis, and indeed it did seem very, very long.
"Stick to it,"
said Peter.
"Everything has an end, and you get to it if only you keep all on."
Which is quite true if you come to think of it, and a useful thing to remember in seasons of trouble, such as measles, arithmetic, impositions, and those times when you are in disgrace and feel as though no one would ever love you again, and you could never, never again love anybody.
Hooray!
said Peter suddenly.
There's the end of the tunnel. Looks just like a pinhole in a bit of black paper, doesn't it?
The pinhole got larger. Blue lights lay along the sides of the tunnel. The children could see the gravel way that lay in front of them. The air grew warmer and sweeter. Another 20 steps and they were out in the good, glad sunshine with the green trees on both sides. Phyllis drew a long breath.
I'll never go into a tunnel again as long as ever I live,
said she.
Not if there are 20, 100,000 millions hounds inside, with red jerseys and their legs broken.
Don't be a silly cuckoo,
said Peter, as usual.
You'd have to.
I think it was very brave and good of me,
said Phyllis.
Not it,
said Peter.
You didn't go because you were brave, but because Bobby and I aren't skunks. Now, where's the nearest house, I wonder? You can't see anything here for the trees.
There's a roof over there,
said Phyllis, pointing down the line.
That's the signal box,
said Peter.
And you know you're not allowed to speak to signalmen on duty. It's wrong.
I'm not near so afraid of doing wrong as I was of going into that tunnel,
said Phyllis.
Come on.
And she started to run along the line, so Peter ran too. It was very hot in the sunshine, and both children were hot and breathless by the time they stopped, and bending their heads back to look up at the open windows of the signal box, shouted,
Hi!
as loud as their breathless state allowed. But no one answered. The signal box stood quiet as an empty nursery, and the handrail of its steps was hot to the hands of the children as they climbed softly up. They peeped in at the open door. The signalman was sitting on a chair tilted back against the wall. His head leaned sideways, and his mouth was open. He was fast asleep.
My hat!
cried Peter.
Wake up!
And he cried it in a terrible voice, for he knew that if a signalman sleeps on duty, he risks losing his situation, let alone all the other dreadful risks to trains which expect him to tell them when it is safe for them to go their ways. The signalman never moved. Then Peter sprang to him and shook him, and slowly, yawning and stretching, the man awoke. But the moment he was awake, he leapt to his feet, put his hands to his head,
like a mad maniac,
as Phyllis said afterwards, and shouted,
Oh, my heavens! What's o'clock?
12:13,
said Peter, and indeed it was, by the white-faced, round-faced clock on the wall of the signal box. The man looked at the clock, sprang to the levers, and wrenched them this way and that. An electric bell tingled, the wires and cranks creaked, and the man threw himself into a chair. He was very pale, and the sweat stood on his forehead,
like large dewdrops on a white cabbage,
as Phyllis remarked later. He was trembling too. The children could see his big hairy hands shake from side to side,
with quite extra-sized trembles,
to use the subsequent words of Peter. He drew long breaths. Then suddenly he cried,
Thank God! Thank God you come in when you did! Oh, thank God!
And his shoulders began to heave, and his face grew red again, and he hid it in those large hairy hands of his.
Oh, don't cry, don't,
said Phyllis.
It's all right now.
And she patted him on one big broad shoulder, while Peter conscientiously thumped the other. But the signalman seemed quite broken down, and the children had to pat him and thump him for quite a long time before he found his handkerchief, a red one with mauve and white horseshoes on it, and mopped his face and spoke. During this patting and thumping interval, a train thundered by.
I'm downright shamed that I am,
were the words of the big signalman when he had stopped crying.
Snivelling like a kid.
Then suddenly he seemed to get cross.
What was you doing up here anyway?
He said.
You know it ain't allowed.
Yes,
said Phyllis.
We knew it was wrong, but I wasn't afraid of doing wrong, and so it turned out right. You aren't sorry we came.
Lord love you. If you hadn't come...
He stopped and then went on.
It's a disgrace, so it is, sleeping on duty. If it was to come to be known, even as it is, when no harm's come of it...
It won't come to be known,
said Peter.
We aren't sneaks. All the same, you oughtn't to sleep on duty. It's dangerous.
Tell me something I don't know,
said the man.
But I can't help it. I'd knowed well enough just how it would be, but I couldn't get off. They couldn't get no one to take on my duty. I tell you, I ain't had 10 minutes sleep this last 5 days. My little chap's ill. Pneumonia, the doctor says. And there's no one but me and his little sister to do for him. That's what it is. The gal must have her sleep. Dangerous? Yes, I believe you. Now go and split on me if you like.
Of course we won't,
said Peter indignantly. But Phyllis ignored the whole of the signalman's speech, except the first 6 words.
You asked us?
She said.
To tell you something you don't know. Well, I will. There's a boy in the tunnel over there with a red jersey and his leg broken.
What did he want to go into the bloomin' tunnel for, then?
Said the man.
Don't you be so cross,
said Phyllis kindly.
We haven't done anything wrong except coming and waking you up. And that was right, as it happens.
Then Peter told how the boy came to be in the tunnel.
Well,
said the man,
I don't see as I can do anything. I can't leave the box.
You might tell us where to go after someone who isn't in a box, though,
said Phyllis.
There's Brigden's farm over yonder. Will you see the smoke a-coming up through the trees?
Said the man, more and more grumpy, as Phyllis noticed.
Well, goodbye then,
said Peter. But the man said,
Wait a minute.
He put his hand in his pocket and brought out some money, a lot of pennies and 1 or 2 shillings and sixpences and half a crown. He picked out 2 shillings and held them out.
Here,
he said.
I'll give you this to hold your tongues about what's taken place today.
There was a short, unpleasant pause, then...
You are a nasty man, though, aren't you?
said Phyllis. Peter took a step forward and knocked the man's hand up, so that the shillings leapt out of it and rolled on the floor.
If anything could make me sneak, that would,
he said.
Come, Phil.
And marched out of the signal box with flaming cheeks. Phyllis hesitated. Then she took the hand, still held out stupidly, that the shillings had been in.
I forgive you,
she said.
Even if Peter doesn't. You're not in your proper senses, or you'd never have done that. I no want of sleep sends people mad. Mother told me. I hope your little boy will soon be better and...
Come on, Phil,
cried Peter eagerly.
I give you my sacred honor word. We'll never tell anyone. Kiss and be friends,
said Phyllis, feeling how noble it was of her to try to make up a quarrel in which she was not to blame. The signalman stooped and kissed her.
I do believe I'm bit off my head, sissy,
he said.
Now run along home to Mother. I didn't mean to put you about. There.
So Phil left the hot signal box and followed Peter across the fields to the farm. When the farm men, led by Peter and Phyllis and carrying a hurdle covered with horsecloths, reached the manhole in the tunnel, Bobby was fast asleep, and so was Jim. Worn out with the pain, the doctor said afterwards.
Where does he live?
The bailiff from the farm asked, when Jim had been lifted onto the hurdle.
In Northumberland,
answered Bobby.
I'm at school in Maidbridge,
said Jim.
I suppose I've got to get back there somehow.
Seems to me the doctor ought to have a look in first,
said the bailiff.
Oh, bring him up to our house,
said Bobby.
It's only a little way by the road. I'm sure Mother would say we ought to.
Will your ma like you bringing home strangers with broken legs?
She took the poor Russian home herself,
said Bobby.
I know she'd say we ought.
All right,
said the bailiff.
You ought to know what your ma'd like. I wouldn't take it upon me to fetch him up to our place without I asked the missus first, and they call me the master too.
Are you sure your mother won't mind?
Whispered Jim.
Certain,
said Bobby.
Then we are to take him up to Three Chimneys?
Said the bailiff.
Of course,
said Peter.
Then my lad shall nip up to the doctor's on his bike and tell him to come down there. Now, lads, lift him, quiet and steady. 1, 2, 3.
Thus it happened that Mother, writing away for dear life at a story about a duchess, a designing villain, a secret passage and a missing will, dropped her pen as her workroom door burst open and turned to see Bobby hatless and red with running.
Oh, Mother,
she cried.
Do come down. We found a hound in a red jersey in the tunnel, and he's broken his leg and they're bringing him home.
They ought to take him to the vet,
said Mother with a worried frown.
I really can't have a lame dog here.
He's not a dog, really. He's a boy,
said Bobby between laughing and choking.
Then he ought to be taken home to his mother.
His mother's dead,
said Bobby.
And his father's in Northumberland. Oh, Mother, you will be nice to him. I told him I was sure you'd want us to bring him home. You always want to help everybody.
Mother smiled, but she sighed too. It is nice that your children should believe you willing to open house and heart to any and everyone who needs help, but it is rather embarrassing sometimes too when they act on their belief.
Oh, well,
said Mother.
We must make the best of it.
When Jim was carried in, dreadfully white and with set lips whose red had faded to a horrid bluey-violet colour, Mother said,
I'm glad you brought him here. Now, Jim, let's get you comfortable in bed before the doctor comes.
And Jim, looking at her kind eyes, felt a little warm, comforting flush of new courage.
It'll hurt rather, won't it?
He said.
I don't mean to be a coward. You won't think I'm a coward if I faint again, will you? I really and truly don't do it on purpose, and I do hate to give you all this trouble.
Don't worry,
said Mother.
It's you that have the trouble, you poor dear, not us.
And she kissed him, just as if he had been Peter.
We love to have you here, don't we, Bobby?
Yes,
said Bobby, and she saw by her mother's face how right she had been to bring home the wounded hound in the red jersey. End of chapter 12.